Welcome back, everybody, to the Uncensored CMO. Now, one of the most downloaded episodes of all time was Les Binet and Sarah Carter, How Not to Plan. So I thought, wouldn't it be great to get them back on the show to talk about the highs and the lows of 2023? Who did the best work and what can we learn? As always, Sarah and Les are brilliant value. There is so much in this episode. You're going to love it. Here it is. Les doesn't do podcasts, but if he did a podcast, it'd be the Uncensored CMO. And if he did a second podcast, it would also be the Uncensored CMO. Les and Sarah, welcome to the Uncensored CMO. Good to see you both.
And you got it right this time, because last time you signed off by thanking Les. At least we could introduce it with
do you know?
Sarah this time,
do you know when you're thinking, I mustn't say Peter and Les, I mustn't say, and then you say, I'm sorry. Well, on a happier note, I thought I'd find out what's caught your eye, or maybe what's made you cry. I don't know. I mean, Les, maybe start with you. What's made you cry this Christmas?
I do blub quite easily at sort of, emotional advertising, Hollywood films, that kind of thing. I'm a bit of a soft touch. So when we were sort of preparing for this, I was looking at some ads, and the thing that got me more than anything else was the Cadbury's corner shop one. That one just had me in bits. But also, I was talking to my wife about the Amazon Sledge ad, and she'd not seen it, so I explained it to her, and I got all choked up just trying to tell her the story.
It's funny. Is it a dad factor? Because Ritson was on here. Also the Cadbury ad. And I choked up at the bit where...
Dads and daughters.
Yeah.
I think. It's not usually dads and sons. It's always the dads and daughters that get it.
So another thing that hit me actually the other night was we made an ad for Savills, the estate agents, which I hadn't seen until Monday night. So we were out for dinner with journalists from Campaign, and they showed some ads, and that one came on. I don't know if you've seen the ad, but it's like got the family with the little kids, and as they grow up, they're measuring the height on the wall and all the marks on the wall. Now you say so. It's a daughter. Yeah. It's a daughter one again. There's a sulky teenage daughter. She's a sulky teenager by the end, and then at the end of it, be quite careful at this point because I might blub. But they're moving out of the house, and then the new couple moves in, and they paint over that bit of the wall, and it's just so. Literally, as I'm saying that, I'm getting goose pimples going up and down my legs. And my daughter's 16. It won't be long till she leaves the house and everything. It was a. Yeah.
That's so true. But you mentioned Campaign Magazine, but they made the Amazon ad Turkey of the Week.
Yes.
Why? I mean, maybe there's a good question for Sarah, because one of my favourite Sarah quotes of all time is, you are not the customer. Why do we as an industry sometimes sort of like to poke at things that are obviously very popular?
Well, I don't think we always poke at popular things. I would say there is an overlap between things that the public like and things that the industry like. So we'll probably come on to talk about McDonald's eyebrows. I think everybody loves that, don't they? Morrison's, everybody loves that. Marmite, everybody loves that. So I think there is an overlap, but I think, you're right. Things can pull in slightly different directions. And I think there are a number of reasons for that. One might be slightly distorting effect of creative awards, which have been well documented, have tended to lean towards awarding certain sorts of work. But then I think, we talked about this the other day, didn't we? That work that Tenzer and Murray did, looking at the values of the industry, or people in the industry, and the values of, the great British public. And they are quite different. The public like conformity and tradition and community and security. And yet, people who work in the industry, brains are wired quite differently. And we tend to like individuality, risk-taking, change. So, there is a pulling in different directions of that. So I think there's a bit of that going on. But if you can pull those things together and celebrate continuity, I'm talking Marmite here, cracking campaign, been going on for 20 years or whatever, but you do that in fresh, interesting, fun, provocative ways, then I think, those things can come together.
So Les, I think you've burst your hard man of data reputation by revealing your blubbing.
Don't think I have one.
Yeah, exactly. But Sarah, maybe ask you what struck you this Christmas. What made you smile about the ads this year?
Well, one of my kind of missions, I think, is to try and get more kind of joy and silliness and fun and humour back into the industry. I think one of the side effects of the great work that you and Peter, I'm going to mention his name, did on the power of emotion is people, I think, got slightly the wrong end of that and thought that meant sort of emotion with a capital E, and everything had to be kind of meaningful and deep and emotional and sad. But I don't think that's true at all. And I think a lot of the time, a lot of what we're seeing this Christmas is that I think people are slightly fed up with brands and comms turning up playing violins. And I think people want brands to turn up playing the banjo a bit more. So I like banjo ads. So I think Be More Banjo is not a bad motto for the year for all of us. So I love the Morrison's oven gloves. I love McDonald's eyebrows. I mean, one of my favourite Christmas ads of all time, I don't know if you even remember from some time ago, was that Muppets giant crumpet ad. Do you remember that? I absolutely love that. Yeah, pure silliness, knockabout, putting on a show, but banjo to the core, and that's the sort of stuff I'm loving.
You've
at the
obviously
moment.
got exceptional judgment, because that was a 5.9. It's one of the first.
Was it?
One of the first top scoring
so
ads on our database, as is Morrison's.
That is so interesting.
And what I love, well, actually, the Muppets one is big budget blockbuster, but the Morrison's, they achieved the similar result on a fairly modest budget, which shows that if you don't have to spend big to get there. But and then McDonald's is great as well. And what I loved about McDonald's is they carried a campaign idea from outside of Christmas into Christmas, because why do advertisers tend to sort of go, we'll do one thing all year and then Christmas will suddenly change it all? You know, but I thought there's something about continuity that's helpful.
No, you're right. You're right. I mean, it's so clever, those oven gloves, because as we were talking earlier, it's just such a clever way of showcasing food in a sort of seamless, intuitive way. But I think often the best creativity makes familiar things feel unfamiliar, and I think that does that brilliantly, doesn't it? I mean, we've all got a pair of oven gloves, but we never really think about them, and yet suddenly they're the sort of hero of that amazing kind of feel-good film. So really clever stuff, I think. I love that. So.
Well, I thought I'd reveal the based on the System 1 data, of course, which is the audience response, how the audience feel about what they're watching. These are the top 3 ads. We've already talked about one of them, actually. So Amazon comes in at number 3, despite its campaign, Turkey. Number 2 is interesting. So Coca-Cola Holidays Are Coming have literally put the same ad on for 25 years. That sort of defies convention, doesn't it? Like sticking to the same thing for that long.
Yeah. I mean, we wrote about this in the book, I think.
Yeah, we did.
We did. The ads mostly don't wear out. If they do wear out, it takes them a lot longer to wear out than anyone gives them a chance to do. And that the ads that do wear out, there are a few ads that wear out, but they tend to be ads that have kind of got a natural shelf life. Like there's a message like, new product, clearly that's, it only has a limited shelf life because the product's only new for a while, or, sale this weekend, or, temporary price offer, all those sorts of things. But good brand ads don't really wear out very, very much at all.
That's so true. I think you were way ahead of the game on this one, by the way, because this year we did a study on a major brand. I won't say who it is. Major brands might advertise at Christmas. Anyway, but we looked at 50 of their ads. We retested them this year, compared them to the last 5 years, and we cut the data all sorts of ways. So we cut the data by how long did it run for, how much money got spent, how recent was it since we did the retest. We could not find anywhere out except for, I think, 2 or 3, and they were time specific. They were event related, so Olympics or something like that, right? But the interesting thing is, in all the others, the score went up. Not down. Actually, so, since first air, because we test on the first air date. So actually, as people start to see it in the campaign bills, actually the score goes up.
Which makes total sense, doesn't it? I mean, we talk about popularity a lot, and I think what people often get the wrong way around is that consistency leads to popularity, not necessarily the other way around. And you see that in, sitcoms or TV programs. Often the most popular ones actually weren't that popular when you start, but it's the repetition that builds that. So, and most of the time we don't get a chance to research this sort of stuff because it's not on enough to do that, is it? I mean, in the book we talk about this funny little Knorr soup campaign, which I think when I first started in advertising, that was the first thing I worked on. So it was Knorr stock cubes in Scotland, and because they make a load of soup in Scotland from scratch. So there's a very specific role for Knorr stock cubes up there to use instead of real stock cubes. But because it was such a small area, they didn't have enough money to make new ads. So they literally ran the same ad. And I think we worked out the average, and I say housewife, I use that word advisedly, because it was Housewives Who Make Soup, had seen that 80 times, 90 times, something like that. And they still loved it. And it wasn't just that they still loved it attitudinally in research. It still worked in terms of sales modelling as well, which quite often wear out's measured sort of attitudinally, isn't it? And not actually on sales. So, yeah. And that was a funny little sort of weird example of something that doesn't normally happen, but just showed how things build.
In the book, I think we wrote about Alan Wicker and Rowan Atkinson on Barclaycard.
Yep.
And a very similar thing there was, so I think it was by accident, wasn't it? That some ads, Rowan Atkinson ads, were included in the clutter reel on other forms of testing, so that the ads got tested.
Oh, that was
the same ads got tested. Yeah. Oh, was it Dulux? Okay. The ads got tested a number of times over the years, and what you actually saw there was wear in, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But there is another thing, which is I think there's wear out over time. Probably harder to test is wear out on repeated exposure, and I don't know whether you do that at all.
That's no. So the way we approached it was to retest the creative as a pre-test again. Effectively. So if you were launching it today, how would people react? Do they recognise the brand? How do they feel? All that kind of thing.
So I think I think if you were to test, say, we'll show people this ad this week, and then we'll get the same panel back a week later, and we'll show them again, and keep doing that, you might find you get different results. And I'm just guessing here, but in particular, I think you might get different results depending on the style of the creative. So, for example, if you imagine an ad where there's a twist at the end, a punchline or a funny little emotional reveal or whatever, I think that would have less impact on repeated exposures. And so it's quite interesting. If you think about the Coke, the holidays are coming ad, that's precisely the kind of creative that you'd expect to have the same effect on repeated exposure, because nothing much happens in the ad. There's no, story and punchline and twist or message.
And there's something particularly appropriate about Christmas, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that, because we all look out for the first signs of Christmas, and you, at Christmas more than any time, you want the same things happening every year to show you that, don't you?
So I can help on this one because we test it. We ask people the reasons for emotion as well. So it's not just, does it make you happy? Why does it make you happy?
Yeah.
And what we get in the answers to that one is, Coke trucks tells me it's Christmas. It is a signal. It's a cultural signal of the season. It's all the associated feeling that Christmas has. It's
so
coming
you want
there.
that to be the same, don't you? Absolutely.
Exactly.
You don't want
you
it
lose
to
that.
change.
If you changed it, you lose it.
It's literally, it's like, the Christmas lights turning on in Regent Street, or putting the tree up, or putting today's we're filming, I don't know if I should say this, on Advent. So it's the Advent calendar opening and all that stuff. Kids particularly, they don't want each Christmas to be unique. They want it to be like the Christmases that we've always had, don't they?
Do you know what we found as well, which was really interesting, is COVID. So when COVID happened, everyone felt like they had to make a different ad or reflect the circumstances we're in. Wrong strategy. What they wanted was the familiar things back. And what we found is anyone that did the nostalgic repeating things, that year, the scores went right up. Anyone that reflected in these times, the scores went down.
And people were watching TV shows, weren't they, that they hadn't seen for a while. There's a lot of nostalgia going on there. But going back to my banjo point as well, I mean, I think to me, the only ads that stood out in that time that I remember even now was sort of KFC, which did brilliant stuff, and Just Eat. So, I mean, and everything else was violins, weren't they? But they rocked up playing a banjo, and I think the only things that stood out, weren't they? So we do overestimate how much we need to play those violins, I think.
Yeah. Well,
I know you like crying at them. But.
Honey, I always like a good sob. But when Peter and I first started talking about emotions versus messages in ads, we made a concerted effort actually to after a while to move the conversation away from emotions versus messages to system 1 versus system 2. I think we may have influenced a certain company in that respect.
I think you did. Yes, you did indeed.
Because when you say emotion, it has those connotations of, say, playing a violin.
John Lewis has got a lot
to answer for as well. Yeah.
And then COVID as well.
And the problem with that, I think, was that you then have to explain what you mean by system 1 and system 2, because it's not, even now, it's not got the currency as when I've got time in a presentation, I'll talk about emotions, feelings, and associations. Because if you say feelings, that's a little bit different from emotions. And associations is another level as well.
Yeah.
And that does give you more leeway to talk about, humour and fun and all that sort of stuff. And also craft,
Totally.
I think we ignore that. Just sheer technical excellence and beauty in ads.
Totally. I mean, this is one of the things that I'm very grateful for Orlando's work, because he's put the spotlight, hasn't he, on very specific features.
Yes.
Yeah.
Even in his latest book, he talks about the tone, the color. He saw a 1-star difference between a cold tone grading and a warm tone.
Yeah.
If you sat in the edit suite looking, you wouldn't think you could shift a star just by just getting a warm tone
and
over
people
a
wouldn't be aware
cold tone.
that was influencing them in that way. But
actually, talking of Orlando, one interesting thing with the wear-in versus wear-out study, we divided it as well about, he kind of categorizes things as right hemisphere characteristics versus left.
Yeah.
And in there, we noticed that the left, which is more activation, sort of product messaging, flat, abstracted, they just stayed flat. Whereas actually the right brain, which is more storytelling, characters, it's set in a place that's familiar, something happens, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. That's where we saw the wear in.
Yeah.
It's a bit like rewatching a Friends sitcom, isn't it?
Yes.
It's like,
it is.
I remember that scene. It's
when you read stories to little children, I mean, they never
tell
say
the
we're
story
getting
again.
fed up with seeing. They want it again and again, don't they? I think I read somewhere the average Disney film is watched sort of 50 times or something by kids, and you think that few times? I mean, I think I was just sit watching them again and again.
Yeah, Teletubbies again.
Like repetition. Yes, exactly. I was thinking when you're talking about different emotions, because I think I saw one of your spirally charts looking at different sorts of happiness, and I loved that Schadenfreude was up there at what number one. I think I said to you, is that the same in different countries? Is there just something wonderful? I know it's a German word. Is there something really British that we like, getting pleasure in things going
sadly,
wrong?
I think pride was at the bottom. So pride in other people's success is the bottom.
But isn't that interesting as well?
Top,
that's it's just such a kind of human emotion, isn't it? And humour, obviously. That's why
humour's number two. Humour's number two. So actually, this is a things
going wrong, but is inherently humorous as well, isn't it? It's people slipping on bananas.
Schadenfreude is funny, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. Yes, I think it has to be
probably,
funny. Probably, I don't think we'd ever
categories.
really meanly want to see people suffering. But
you tripped over your shoelaces.
But that's interesting, I thought.
Have we rediscovered humour this year, do you think? I mean, if we take the top 10 based on System 1 scores, about half of them have got humour. Audi, a few sort of pantomime jokes in there.
I've heard people saying this, but I didn't think there was that much to laugh at, really. Maybe it's a sign of the times that people are saying, there's a rediscovery of humour, simply because the ads are not entirely po-faced. I mean, there's nothing in there that actually made me laugh out loud. A wry smile. And I'm not saying that's why you have to say, but if you think about, the 1970s, I'm old enough to remember them. I think
comedy. Then
there were ads there that would actually make you laugh out loud. And I mean, think about like
Hamlet cigar or something would be a good one, wouldn't it?
And actually, more recently, so Specsavers. One of my favourites is the sheep shearing one.
Yes,
and that is a laugh out loud ad. But I think I haven't seen anything for years. I don't think that I can think of.
Actually, so maybe comedy would be a better definite. That's sort of comedy of the tango ad.
I mean, there's a wry smile.
Yes.
Or a likability or a bit of warmth or whatever. But
joy and silliness. There's definitely more of that sort of stuff, isn't there? Maybe not, as you say, laugh out loud humour, but interesting. There's the new Cannes category for humour, which is kind of symbolic of people feeling that needs to be
Cannes laughter, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes, exactly.
You see, I think advertising has got very po-faced. I mean, the whole industry has become worthy and serious, and it's in line with the times, isn't it? Sort of. I mean, whole areas of humour are off limits. I know personally. And, everything has to be kind of scrutinised in such a way, and has to be purposeful and, saving the planet and everything. And so actually,
well, let me ask you, Les, what's the role of purpose in advertising? Is it effective? Because this debate seems to rage on and on.
There's very clear evidence, isn't there?
Yeah.
So people have not made it explicit enough, but the evidence from the data, the IPA data bank, is that purpose-driven advertising is about 30% less effective overall. So that's quite clear. And also increasingly, the stuff that was used, like, is it Stengler with his book Grow? Richard Shotton,
yes,
did a fantastic takedown of that stuff in his book, and basically just showed the research was bogus. So, there is no real evidence that purpose-driven organisations are more profitable. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't do purpose-driven stuff, but there's no. It's not a business strategy that has anything very much to say for it.
It's probably the classic, isn't it, that every company asks the questions, would you feel better about our product if you knew that it saved the planet? It's like, well,
of course you would.
Who are the 10% that say no?
Yeah.
That's more the story rather than 90% that say yes.
Similarly, purpose-driven marketing on average is less effective than ordinary marketing. And that's, if you look at Peter Field's analysis of that, you see why that is that you can do good purpose-driven advertising, but in order to do it, you've got to do all of the things that make marketing effective normally. You've got to have great creative work. It's got to reach the right people. It's got to have scale, reach, blah, 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 blah. And you've got to have a purpose in the ad that is closely linked and relevant to the category and the brand. And it's got to be totally plausible and you've got to it's got to be in the grain of the company. And
all that means that's incredibly difficult.
Yeah,
having tried it's really hard to line all that stuff up. So it's really hard to do well, and it's really easy to do badly. And I think that's what people have found.
So what you end up adding two more hoops to jump through. So the first hoop is you've got to find a purpose that is a genuine one. And with a lot of purpose-driven marketing, what you end up with is brands who bolt a purpose on, and it has nothing to do with the category and nothing to do with the company. And then you've got to do that in a way that sort of, it's got to be true, and then it's got to be in some way relevant to the consumer decision. And, God help you to get through those two additional hoops.
No, you have, and I've seen data, I'm sure you have as well, on, as you say, it's based on flawed research a lot of times. If you ask people how is it going to influence your purchasing, and that's the stuff that people tend to quote, you get really high numbers, and why wouldn't you? But the correct thing to ask is ask a number of other questions as well about price, product, availability, flavour, and then you see it goes right down to about number 10 or 11. It's not actually anywhere near leading.
And people don't know why they buy things. They don't have any real insight into their own motives and decisions, and they're not honest.
Emotional. Exactly. So I think you'll see a lot. I mean, it's happening already, isn't it? A great purpose correction. I think you'll see that word used a lot less.
The great purpose correction. I like that. There's the headline.
Peak purpose.
It'll be purpose. Used a lot less. Used much more specifically. I think. I think businesses will still do good at the business level, but I think brands will kind of free themselves up from those shackles a lot more, and it will become a strategy rather than the strategy, which is what it always should have been.
Actually, I mean, I'd even slightly contradict you there, which is that what we're seeing is that businesses are downgrading it themselves. So there was quite a nice little article in The Economist recently where they'd done textual analysis of earnings calls for companies. So what they've done was, they got recordings of the earnings calls, all those conversations that they have with investors. And they looked at the incidence of words like purpose, ESG, sustainability, et cetera, versus things like profit and shareholder value. Purpose down, profit up. And that, there's a very obvious reason for that. It's interest rates. Purpose is easy to justify in a world where interest rates are zero and money's free. In a world where interest rates are now back up to, more like historic levels, you're playing with other people's money and you're paying a price for it. and your shareholders demand profits and they want them now. All that stuff goes to the bottom. And at the same time, ordinary people who might have gone, oh, we can afford to spend 5p more and buy a worthy brand are going, yeah, no, I just want the cheap stuff.
Totally. The interesting nuance in the data, actually. So when Peter shared the data, we did a bit of research as well, System 1 point of view, about how purpose impacts on emotional response. The interesting difference was it worked much more in B2B. So, and it also made employees feel good about their company.
Yes.
So interestingly, so there is a caveat, I think, to this, which is if you're a B2B business or you're trying to build an employer brand, it is quite a potent.
Yes.
And for other stakeholders as well, I think Peter showed that that was a very clear purpose benefit. But as you say, it's a bit different when you get to the
which
stuff
makes
that
sense.
it was meant to be doing.
Okay, I get that,
And I'm not saying companies should not, pursue other goals than shareholder value. Personally, I would prefer to work for an organisation that had a purpose that was higher than making money. I kind of feel we do. A great agency like ours, at its best, cares most about making great ads, and then money comes off the back of that. And that's a purpose. Purpose doesn't have to be saving the planet.
Well, that is a good point, isn't it? Yeah, purpose doesn't. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, if you're working for an ice cream company, I'd want to work for the company that said we're going to make the best ice cream in the world.
Yeah,
even if it means that we don't make as much money. It's has most traction internally. You want your job to have meaning. People want meaning. But that doesn't mean you have to put it in your ads. So I think I'm right in saying, this may no longer be true, but I think it certainly used to be true that Kellogg's, I think it's Kellogg's, or one of the other big American companies, which is quite paternalistic and does work in the community in good works. I think they had a kind of rule that you're not allowed to talk about it.
Oh, right.
So they, and if you think about it, that's more in line with the kind of 19th century, Christian type. Yeah, exactly. You do good works, but you don't boast about giving to charity.
Something about it, you have to do something else.
And the modern, purpose-driven marketing approach says, okay, right, we need something to talk about in the ads, but we don't have to actually do this stuff. We just have to put it in the ads.
You're quite right. It's the opposite. It's the other way, isn't it? I want to be seen as virtuous rather than actually virtuous.
So as Peter pointed out in his research, you have to walk the walk before you can even think about talking the talk. And talking the talk is not necessarily a thing you have to do. So another example of that is, John Lewis is a purpose-driven organisation in the sense that it's a profit-sharing, mutually owned company. It's effectively, you can think of it as being effectively a communist organisation with a charter that goes back to the 1920s, about all their sort of social goals. And they've hardly ever talked about it.
But what I thought you were going to say was one of the things that hasn't been talked about in all the talk about the John Lewis Christmas ad, which is the shift in strategy from, their social children in care initiative being front and centre of the ad last Christmas to now we're back to character-led storytelling and selling plush toys in the shops again. They're still doing the social care, children in care initiative. I noticed lots of talk about it in Waitrose or whatever, but it's not front and centre of the ads.
You don't have to put it in your ads.
That's the kind of purpose correction, I think, which is happening.
I could talk about this for quite a long time because I get quite engaged. Actually, if you take morality and politics and ethics seriously, and I prefer to use terms like that than purpose, then doing those things, doing good because you think you'll make more money, is inherently contradictory.
Totally.
You just go, I think I'm going to be a good person because I'll be richer that way. If you really are a purpose-driven organisation, you will do it in spite of the fact that it will lose you money.
It costs, exactly, and it costs you.
As Birnbach said, a principle isn't a principle until it costs you money. Anyway, I get
agree
quite
more.
engaged.
Well, we're talking about doing the right thing as well. What was lovely, one of the lovely things about Amazon ad this year was representation of older people in ads.
Yes.
I love that. That
That might be why we quite like it.
I loved it. It was cross-generational, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But going back to Sarah's, you are not the target audience. I think, and it's interesting, I wonder whether some people who were sniffy about it because, they want to work in an industry that's young and hip.
And cool.
Whereas ordinary people are quite capable of seeing someone who's not like themselves, older, younger, whatever, and still...
It brilliantly did one of the things we learned in our Feeling Seen report, looking at diversity and representation advertising, which is better to tell one person's story really well than to try and represent a group.
Well, you have to have specificity to tell a story. You can't tell a story with multiple things. So I think, what people get muddled up is sort of reflecting and connecting, isn't it? You have to reflect very specifically, and ideally, I think we'd say with people who are not usually represented in ads, that's great. But then you can and must connect emotionally widely from that.
Yeah.
And that's what that does brilliantly, doesn't it? We show elderly women of a certain age, which is a very specific kind of reflection, but we can all connect emotionally with the idea of lifelong friendship, especially amongst women. You don't often see stories of women in friendship, which are incredibly strong emotional bonds, and then that lovely twist of the kind of reminiscing of what you did. Witness all these women going on kind of reunion weekends and think, we love that. So incredibly widely connecting, but you reflect very specifically, and people get those muddled up, I think.
Yeah. So
yes, really good lesson on that.
And we may have talked about this last time. Vignette ads.
Yes.
So there's advertisers who want to represent to reach out to a wide audience, often feel that they need to show all the different kinds of audience in the ad. So where you end up with that is sort of vignettes of, black, white, young, old, men, women, gay, straight, rich, poor, etc., etc. We're all as a nation together, and all those ads all look the fucking same, don't they?
That's where that kind of reflecting and connecting model works really well, doesn't it? Because you can reflect widely, as you say, in a vignette, something for everyone, but actually you don't connect with anyone at all emotionally because you can't tell a story. But equally, you can connect very widely with everyone, witness an oven glove, without actually reflecting anyone or a meerkat or whatever. I think we forget that in our kind of diversity and
characters
reflecting.
and animation allow you to.
I mean, those meerkats talk to everyone, not showing anyone in there. That so that another benefits of character ads, I suppose, that you kind of bypass all that stuff.
And so you can do that with characters, but also if you have some kind of universality of a story or an emotion or a feeling or whatever, So I think there's a quote in the book. Was it you that said, or you were quoting, you don't have to be black to appreciate Shakespeare's Othello. You just have to understand jealousy. And, you don't have to be old to appreciate the Amazon ad. You simply have to, understand friendship and, and about long-standing friendships. And
there was one really interesting insight because we've been working on this Feeling Seen kind of series of studies for 3 years now, actually, looking at how different people feel represented in ads. And there's a lovely summary from it, which is when you see yourself in advertising, you feel more happiness, you feel stronger emotion, you're more likely to engage with the brand, right? So there's a lovely headline story. And we called it How Diverse Advertising Unites a Nation as well. And how actually everyone else also feels good seeing other people represented. So lovely story, great. One group of people for whom that's not true, older people. So we suddenly did the study on older people going, let's see this happen again. And then I got this funny call from the team going, John, we've got a problem. I'm like, what do you mean? It disproves your law of feeling seen.
And I think that's how you represent older people, isn't it?
You've got it, Les.
You've got to get the emotions right, haven't you?
So we had to call it Wise Up, which is actually the way to make older people feel good about themselves in advertising is give them a lead role. Make sure it's funny. You show them as being smart smarter, tap into the years of cultural references that they've got, make them useful to society. It's not like, we see them sailing into the sunset on a yacht. That's not it. They don't want that. So it's very interesting nuances, actually. But this is where Amazon got it right, because they were leading, they were funny, it was a twist, they had connection between them, all those things.
Yeah, emotional connection. We talked, didn't we, went about that, one of my other favourite ads, that Southern Comfort ad of Live Comfortably. I mean, not a classic representation of who you would want your drinker probably to be, someone with a pretty big beer gut kind of swaggering up a beach. But, we all identify with that feeling of being totally happy in your own skin. And a brilliant example of casting. And it's just all about interesting casting, really, isn't it? This isn't tick box stuff, but just characters that leap out at you and you want to be with and you can identify with and tell stories brilliantly. That's what it's all about.
And you mentioned characters a little bit earlier, didn't you? And it actually brings us to our number one campaign nicely, which is Audi's Kevin the Carrot.
Yes.
So on top of the poll again, the only advertiser, apart from Coke, because they've been going 25 years, the only advertiser to get 5 years 5-star in a row and continually get better and better each year, which is spectacular. Yeah. But in a way, they've deployed that character Fluent device, as Orlando tends to call it, doesn't it? Which it has universal appeal again. Yeah. So it's a lovely example of that.
Yep. And he tells emotional stories. We're not all carrots, but we can we can identify with that. And interesting, as you say, it started off as three stars, something like this. So
3.6.
That was going to be my question.
Yeah.
So has it sort of worn in over time?
Popularity has grown.
Two things have happened. So there's definitely wear in, but there's also what they've done is they've kept the campaign idea, they've kept the construct the same.
Yeah.
But what they do brilliantly every single year is they play to sort of a slightly different story.
Yeah.
So Willy Wonka this year, last year it was Christmas Carol and so on. And then they also tell relevant jokes in there. So there's a few kind of
quite
pantomime
panto-like, isn't it?
kind of this year's joke is.
Yeah.
But what they do actually, every one of those jokes is tested, right, to make sure that it lands, it gets the right response, it gets, So
right. With you,
yes,
okay.
So every second.
So how do you test?
So we start quite early in the year actually with a long animatic. So it might be usually about 4 minutes. So imagine the story, a black and white animatic, really stretched out.
Yeah.
So voiceover, the jokes that, kind of all done in an animatic style. And then what we work out is we see, does happiness and surprise change when that scene happens or the joke lands or the voiceovers? And literally we do that and we edit down to 60 to 90 based on the longer version.
Okay.
So
it's
thoroughly
forensic,
tested.
isn't it?
Very forensic.
That's interesting because I know I've heard people say in the past that humour is one of the things that's hardest to test with animatics. But I think when you're dealing with an ad which is effectively cartoon style, you're closer to the finished film. It would be much harder to test, say, Rowan Atkinson.
And we never,
an actor's comic timing, right?
Delivery and all that
stuff.
That's
very hard. But because it's animatic, it's almost like a cartoon, isn't it? So
and it's quite
much easier.
Voiceover heavy as well, isn't it? It's not like you're relying on a lot of expressions and kind of
and
expression humour. There is comic comedy. There's physical kind of knockabout humour.
And the Jim Broadbent voiceover has become a Fluent kind of voiceover.
And that's a craft thing as well, isn't it? One of those things that you don't really. I think it's probably an ad it's very easy to overlook how they make it look very easy, don't they? But there's a huge amount of thinking that goes into that, and very layered, as you say, like a great panto where the adults laugh at some stuff and the kids don't really get it or whatever.
You can watch it 2 or 3 times and get little different things. It's one of those ones that you do discover, I didn't spot that joke about Willy Conker and all that.
Yeah, so this is probably a terrible thing to admit. I don't see many ads because I
breaking news, ladies and gentlemen. Les Binet doesn't watch ads.
I don't really watch television.
I'm double breaking news. This doesn't watch. He recommends television.
So that I'm quite insulated from a lot of that of actual ads unless I see them during the working day. I think this is the first time I've seen a Kevin the Carrot ad.
Is it?
I think.
Wow.
And so I think it had less effect on me. I thought it was nice. I thought it was charming, etc. Yeah, I think I'm at the 3-star level. Yeah. So I've seen it once, and that's the first time I've seen any of the campaign. So I think I'm at the 3-star level. And you talk about jokes, and I was thinking, are there any jokes in there? And I think, then there's there's a couple of
Did you
things.
get the Big Willie joke? You didn't spot that one?
No,
There you go. You have to watch it again.
Yeah, so
Look out for the Big Willie joke.
I think it's a bit about, I could see his bum or his bum crack or something like with the plum or plum crack.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I think I think that's an example of how wherein works. You begin to know and like the character, and you're expecting certain things, and you seek repeated exposure, you get the jokes. But I'm not at that level yet.
Well, let's bring Excel in, or the IPA. IPA effectiveness gold was last year, the Kevin campaign. And what's lovely about Aldi is that that they call it in the case study discounting the other variables. So it's a wonderful example where they've been able to isolate the impact of advertising, because we're all trying to do that, but there's so much else going on at the same time. But over the period in question, Aldi weren't opening stores. Their discounting policy was the same. So they were able to go, well, actually, all the other variables are roughly the same. And they could look at the market share gains of Aldi each Christmas. And I mean, you'll know this, but Christmas is the one time where people are most open to changing the store they visit. And usually Aldi loses share at Christmas.
Because they want to go up to...
They want to go to M&S, right?
M&S,
Shorthand.
Yeah.
And that trade down has got smaller and smaller and smaller every year. And then the trade into in New Year, where you go, I've got to tighten the belt, has gone up and up and up. So it's just a wonderful...
Really
I think it's the best case study I've ever seen of advertising's effect on business results. And I mean, I'll be misquoting them, but it's like a very big percentage of the number of people that visit Aldi stores. Most of it happens in the 12 weeks after Christmas. They can attribute back to the campaign, which is amazing. I mean, it's wonderful to see. And the ROIs and stuff are just fantastic on it.
Yeah. And I can see how it works. I mean, you look at that ad and, admittedly, I've seen one ad in the whole campaign ever, and immediately it makes Aldi feel Christmassy, which, it wouldn't naturally do. So,
well, actually, you guys are to blame. Actually, I don't know if you know this. But the original brief was beat John Lewis.
Yeah.
Because the whole idea around Audi, everyone knows it's cheap. We know that, right?
Yeah.
What we have to do is become John Lewis at Christmas for people. And that was, in a way, you can take some credit for it. But.
And they were one of the first campaigns, I think, weren't they, at Christmas, where I remember the first year that Kevin came back, it was like, ooh, Kevin's back again. That's a bit of a surprise. You don't normally see that.
Yeah.
So they were kind of doing the consistency job and campaign before other people have started.
The other thing I love about it is, from a marketer's point of view as well, is how it works everywhere. You can buy the toy in store. Kevin pops up and has conversations on social media. It's on the side of the bus, not the bus, the truck when it delivers the store.
Yeah.
They've really integrated it and very cleverly throughout, which is brilliant. So doing the long and the short, it's kind of working in both senses.
Yeah. Good for them.
The other thing, looking through the year actually, so the looking at non-Christmas ads as well for a moment, because maybe also having a bit of a Christmas theme. There's also some consistency in Fluent devices. So a little tip to my former employer actually. So one of the top scoring ads this year was Ribena. Now I got a bit of inside intel on this because having worked there, but the Ribena brought back the Ribena berries, and I don't know if you've seen those, but at System when we tested it, the Ribena berries are one of the most recognizable kind of distinctive assets out there, and they got a 5.6 star. And it shows what another top tip I think for advertisers is to look back at what your brand owns as distinctive assets. I think we're too quick, aren't we, to sort of crumb up with something new and we don't use something old.
Absolutely.
How long was it since they'd used the
berries? So
did you work on that
I was there from 2016 to 2018. I remember this funny situation where we were making a new ad, and then I asked this casual question to the team. I mean, I got into so much trouble for this, and I'm sure they're listening and will go, John. But I said, no, let's do this new idea as long as it beats last year. So while you're testing the new idea, do you mind just testing what happened last year? I got this funny text message going, oh, good news, bad news. Good news, last year was a 5.6 star, the best ad that's ever been run in soft drinks in the history of ever, sort of thing. Bad news is it's going to be kind of hard to justify making a new one this year. It's like, that kind of thing. But it was a lesson for me actually, because I didn't know, even though I was the marketing director, I didn't realize how good that asset was for the brand. I just didn't have the history and understanding. And so many, marketing directors come and go.
It's one of the great, the new John Lewis positioning, I guess, has got this tension inherent in it, hasn't it, about letting your traditions grow. I mean, that is what you have to do as a manager of brand comms, isn't it? You have to decide what to keep, what you move on subtly, and what gives howls of protest if you chuck it away, really. So it's about managing that, isn't it? Not chucking out your black currants because that's your strongest asset, but keeping it fresh every year. So but I think that's everyone's getting better at that now, I think, aren't they? Rather than just defaulting to rip it up and let's do something new.
This is what our friend Ritson did say to me the other day. He was like, is this the year we finally understood consistency?
Yeah.
It does feel like that, doesn't it?
It does, it does.
The penny has dropped.
I mean, we wrote about that.
Yeah, we did.
Were you way ahead of it?
We were really struggling to think of any campaigns, weren't we? We had Gary Lineker was still going for walkers at the time. We had Felix Cat Food, which is our little cartoon black and white cat, which we worked on as an agency for
22 years.
But we were really sort of scrabbling around trying to find anything else. There wasn't anything.
Okay. So talking about consistency, you got a good Felix IPA case study on the matter, haven't you?
Yeah. Well, so we wrote this one in about 2002 or something like that. Consistency killed the cat. Well, no, it wasn't that. But anyway,
continuity saved the cat.
I can't remember.
Something like that. Yeah.
But and it shows the kind of the long roots of the problem. I think the business in general, and then the marketing community and the advertising community off the back of that, became obsessed with innovation and disruption. It's all part of that mantra that, comes out of Silicon Valley and all that sort of thing.
Innovate or die.
Yeah, exactly. And innovation is important, and particularly when it comes to products and so forth. But we bought that so much that we forgot about the other side, consistency and continuity. And great campaigns are about continuity and freshness. Actually, Kevin the Carrot's quite a good example of that. In that you've got continuity, but you've got something new each year, I gather. And in that Felix case study, we contrasted what Felix was doing, which was running a consistent campaign for 22 years, the same little black and white cat, and often running the same ads for, the very first one, is it the piano player one? I think they dug that out year after year. They bring it out, every so often. Versus Whiskers, which was at that point TBWA, I think, and they totally bought the mantra of disruption, and they were doing something new every time. And what we saw was that they were outspending us 4-1, and we were beating them. We went over that period from being the 5th or 6th biggest brand to beating them to become the number 1 brand, on a quarter of their spend.
Love it.
Just with a little black and white cat frisking about to music.
I love it.
And that was a great example of that. Consistency breeds popularity rather than the other way around, because people got more and more familiar with it, loved it more and more. We started doing tea towels, didn't we, and all the rest of it. And
so I found myself the other day talking to a bunch of marketers somewhere abroad, and I won't tell you what category, but as I was talking to them, it became really apparent that they totally bought into the idea that marketing was about innovation and purpose. You can imagine how I reacted to that. And I said, actually, clever marketing is when, if you're a really clever marketer, you can sell the same old stuff with no innovation whatsoever. The real challenge of marketing is to sell more stuff when you've got nothing to say, when you've got no new product, when there's no, killer fact in the ad, but just to do, to do the same thing really well. And we talk about Marmite in the book, where, Marmite was a brand that had no significant innovation for about 100 years, until Marmite Squeezy. That was the one
another
significant,
good example.
and still grew.
Yeah, another good example of that is Guinness. So I don't know if you know, this year Guinness became Britain's favourite pint. Again, one product,
Yeah.
One product, one idea, consistently executed.
Really distinctive assets.
Distinctive assets.
Banging
does all those
soundtracks.
Soundtracks,
yeah. Bit of animated stuff going on.
And I suppose...
Banjo, beer advertising.
Banjo,
yes. Makes you feel good.
I mean, there are other ways of doing things. And actually, I suppose we provided a big counter-example with John Lewis. In that, or on the surface, it appears that we have, because people have asked me over the years, why don't you run the same John Lewis ad each Christmas?
With Edgar back.
But I think what we did there was a consistent strategy, the thoughtful gifting strategy, the idea that you're telling a story about an example of finding the perfect gift for someone you really care about. So that's, the idea underpinning it was the same, and the whole load of consistent stylistic things musically, the palette of how the ads look and so on. But the other thing is that what we did was to create, if you like, a ritual, and again, a bit like the holidays are coming, that, this thing of there would be a big reveal, the big ad that would make everyone cry, and so there was a kind of continuity and consistency in that, even though superficially there wasn't. Quite a hard one to do because to make it work, you've got to come up with an absolute banger every year.
Yes, exactly. That's the pressure. I mean, well, unrelated to the ads, but the thing that used to make me laugh about the John Lewis was the guy that had the John Lewis Twitter handle.
Yes, the American.
Yeah, in Canada or something. Isn't it Canada? But
wasn't he an American politician or something?
But doesn't he get
maybe Canadian?
He used to get he used to get flooded with kind of people talking about him for like a week when the ad came out. Suddenly it became famous.
He won't have that problem anymore, will he?
So there we go. Now, actually, just before we go on to the next topic, two interesting stats for you. We tested the very first TV ad ever to air on TV back in the early 1950s, I think.
1965.
Gibbs SR, was it?
It was a toothpaste. Yeah, you got it.
It has to be 65 because that's when commercial TV. Yeah. Oh no, hang on, was that? I've got that wrong, haven't I? 65 commercial TV.
Yeah, it was 50s or 60s. I can't quite. I can't remember the date, but it was for a toothpaste, plummy British, proper BBC News kind of accent. Scored over 3-star. Mm-hmm. Isn't that amazing? Now, I know there's probably nostalgia and it just, there'll be a little bit of intrigue in it, but it does go to show that would put it in the top 15% on our database.
Because what percentage of your database would have been around at that time?
Not many.
No,
not many, exactly. And it's black and white.
I know you tested some of John Webster's ads, didn't you? That the Martians were up there pretty well up the top, weren't they?
Probably the best example, Hovis Boy on a Bike. 46 years. Well, we tested it 3 or 4 years ago, so it's now 50 years old, that ad, but was 5-star.
I think this sort of slightly leads us into a point that we were talking about before we started recording, which is to interpret results like that, you've got to put them side by side with comparables. So, for example, Hovis Boy on a Bike, I'm sure part of the emotional response from that will be from people who remember it. There'll be a nostalgia thing. And not all the people in your group will be people who remember it, but they, and similarly, you show a black and white ad from the 60s, it will have an emotional impact simply in the same way that seeing something really old, does. So in order to assess the emotional impact of ads, you've got to put them alongside things that are in some way similar. So Hovis Boy on the Bike versus Cadbury's Everyone's a Fruit and Nut Case, for example. Like categories. So
this is a very, very good point. And I'm glad you raised it because I wanted to ask you about this. So I've pulled off the average star rating of the categories this year and ranked them. There is a big difference. Because I know we were looking at the top ads this year. Sarah, I know you and I were having a chat about
Lots
this.
Lots of sugar in there.
Yeah.
Well, there is. So if I read out the top 3, in at number 3, Magnum, a new Magnum variant. Number 2, the advert for the British Bake Off.
Yes.
Number 1, Cadbury Dairy Milk, glass and a half, right? And let me tell you the top 3 on average. In at number 3, baking.
Right.
So boy and
Yep.
like.
Yep.
Number 2, ice cream.
Mhm.
Number 1, chocolate. So
Yeah.
mirror the best ads
Absolutely,
mirror
that's
the
really
most
yeah.
emotive categories.
Yes.
I mean, you see. Actually, I've done a little bit of work on chocolate advertising, not for a long time, but earlier in my career. And one thing, so econometrically, one of the things I noticed is with chocolate, anything works.
Yeah.
It's really easy to sell chocolate.
The same with ice cream. I worked on ice cream.
It's
okay.
very impulse, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just have to remind
Literally,
people
it's
it's there.
called impulse,
Yeah.
the category.
Well,
so,
particularly impulse chocolate, because you go into a corner shop. There are how many variants are there to choose from? A
Yes.
million. You only have to say chocolate, and people literally start salivating. I'm probably will myself in a second. So you could sell chocolate by just going, aero. And that's it. You just say the word aero, immediately sales go up, So it's not hard to get a response. I thought, for example, Bake Off, there'll be first of all, people think like cakes.
Yeah.
But secondly, people love Great British Bake Off. And so again, you could probably
it's
run
more a test of the program.
Yeah,
Exactly,
you could
just
run
say
a
it.
still that said
Bake Off's come.
Bake Off next week.
Exactly.
People go, oh, I love that.
No,
Great
absolutely.
So
ad.
there's sort of like built-in feeling to the category that
There is.
there's a-
And this is really important. We'll come on
yeah.
to it, but just before we talk about why that's important, because there's a very important point that comes up all the time when I'm talking to advertisers about this. Before I do, here's the harder question to both of you. What do you think the lowest performing category is? And I'll give you some leeway here. So any of the bottom 3, what do you reckon?
How about ball bearings?
Ball bearings, okay.
Probably not a lot of that in the database.
I say that because
pile cream
although
or
what's-
something.
yeah,
and
pile
then there's
cream,
probably not
okay.
a lot of that either.
So ball bearing category would be what?
So industrial products. or
Industrial
something like that,
products.
yeah.
What do you think, Sarah?
I say that. I say that simply because I've been talking to a ball bearing manufacturer.
There you go. Breaking news again on this podcast. Well, it gets you some effective ball bearing advertising next year. Sarah, what do you reckon? Bottom performing category?
Cars?
Cars. Cars are an interesting one. They're statistically exactly average.
Right.
And
okay.
the interesting thing with cars is all advertisers are hugging the average line. So there's
Right.
like zero difference between the
Yeah,
best and the worst.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
like the most stereotypically. In fact, I think cars have been using AI for 10 years.
Longer
very
than
like
that.
it.
Because if you
doesn't it?
use AI for cars, you get the same
Yeah,
thing
yeah,
again.
yeah.
It's
Trying
like,
to think.
I do think there is a problem with finance.
they're low.
Actually, what I was
Yeah.
thinking particularly was things like life assurance and pensions, because it's
That's close.
because it's quite. It's again, I've done a bit of work in that area. It's both boring and frightening.
Yeah.
Thinking about whether or not you're going to starve to death in retirement. No one wants to think about.
Do you know
it.
what? It's one of the only only awkward moments I've had doing the job I do is because usually when you measure, you test with the national population and then you test with your target audience, the score goes up, right? It's obvious,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That's
Yeah.
why we do targeting, right? And I was working with a major pension provider, and they got a 1 star. And I'm in that awkward position. I'm in quite a lot of the time. But don't worry, we'll test it with the customer audience. I'm sure it's going to go up. Oh, how wrong I was.
Yeah.
It went down.
Yes,
because
it
actually
reminded you of your
they did not
inadequacy.
want to be reminded of,
And so it's quite hard to do good work in that category, but it is possible. I mean, for the life you don't yet know. That was Allied Dunbar, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I think. And they managed to, they had music, humour.
There was some good Paul Whitehouse stuff, wasn't there? As well, for Aviva, which is
Actually
really
interesting.
Good.
So humour's quite good at diffusing
There's a
stuff.
serious case for humour.
Yeah, I think more generally in society, one of the things that humour can do is allow you to go to touch areas.
Word than spoken in jest.
Yes,
isn't it?
yeah,
It's very much that.
exactly.
So what was the third
You got
one,
you
John?
got close. You got
Right.
very close.
It's ball bearings, isn't it?
I think financial services are mid to high 1 star. The bottom, well, I should go from the third least popular category is gyms.
Mhm.
The second most least popular category is slimming aids,
Yeah.
and the least popular category is sport betting.
Sports betting. Okay.
It's interesting the
right,
juxtaposition
okay.
with the eating and not staying healthy.
Yes,
so
it is, isn't it?
I hope the
Yeah.
government's not listening to this, by the way,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
we might end up with a
So
bit of...
sports betting presumably is that there'd be a certain amount of antipathy to.
It's probably regulation, because actually one interesting thing is actually we work in the US with a major manufacturer of health products, I'll say, medicines. And in their category, they actually by law have to state the negative side effects that come with the category. Now, if you think about sports betting, and their category average is 1.2, right? So it's the lowest on our entire database globally. Now, of course, with sport betting, you have to have all the terms and conditions, and you have to have the gamble aware and that sort of thing. So I'm pretty sure it'd be government regulation that's driven that down, which is the point of it, is actually to suppress the impact of
interesting,
advertising.
again, going back to finance, financial advertising is heavily regulated as well. And I remember working again on stuff to do with life assurance and pensions. I remember that the company I was working with years ago, they had more people in the compliance department than in the marketing department by a factor of something like 4 or something like that. And the ads were so heavily regulated that effectively you couldn't say anything, which was tremendous because it meant that they ran ads with no messages in,
and
which really worked. There was no option but to do emotional advertising, and it worked.
I love it. Actually, one of my isn't there was a Millward Brown study, wasn't there, where they found the more messages you have, the less gets remembered.
Yeah.
It's like the same thing, isn't it? Like, as you say, the more you get
and the
remembered.
more you crank the rational bit up, the more the emotional bit goes down.
Exactly. Real truths.
So people often sort of say, "Oh, well, what's the optimum number of messages in an ad?" And you go, if you
one.
No, the answer's
nil.
Nil. Exactly. Now, I'm glad we talked about this because one of the things I have to explain to people when Orlando built the kind of system on methodology, inspired very much by your approach, IPA database again, looking at, and what he did is he looked at the relationship between ESOV and market share changes in the following year, and then he worked out the emotional response and created, I think he called it the kind of creative amplifier sort of thing. But what's really interesting, and we have to explain this to people, because obviously we do the 5-star system and everyone kind of celebrates that because it's simple and intuitive, but actually the prediction is actually related to your performance within your category context. So what he found is that your ability to outperform your category average creative, exactly as you do with ESOV, is like a creative weighted ESOV kind of measure. So if you're in ice cream, you better be doing 5-star advertising.
Yeah.
Equally, if you're in sport betting, slimming or gyms, a 2-star is going to
you're off to the races,
absolute winner.
Yeah.
So category context is actually, so you when you get into the data, the contextual thing is critical.
Yeah.
And I suppose the other thing is that in order to really outperform your category, you probably want to be doing something that's a little bit different. And that's one of the reasons I think why there will never be any hard and fast rules about what is effective in creative terms, because one of the rules is to break the rules.
Yeah.
So, for years I've been thinking, the John Lewis thing, we're not going to keep getting away with this forever because other people will copy us, and there's more and more of that kind of advertising around. Sooner or later, if a formula works, other people will copy it, and then it will stop working.
Yeah, and we're kind of seeing that at Christmas, aren't we? With the the System 1 testing.
Yeah.
You can kind of see it coming through.
I was thinking that when you were talking about actually the lack of a distinctive asset per se for John Lewis, and when we talk about handwriting, didn't we, in tone, and that is the stuff that's just so widely copied now, isn't it? That,
breathy singers.
We had it to ourselves for so long. So, where are babies? I was just musing on your list. They must be up there fairly high.
Yeah, very high. So
with sugar.
The couple of categories actually that will probably round out the top 5 or 6. Pet care. So pet ads. So we always joke about putting a dog in your ad.
Power of fur.
Often when you're looking at it, you go, geez, there's a very average dog ad in the top 20 kind of on our database. So again, with that, you need to do something more interesting with the dog than just feature the dog. So that's one. And babies, of course. I mean, in fact, the Super Bowl winning ad, was it this year or last year, was Huggies. The only Super Bowl ad to get a 5-star was I mean, it was brilliantly funny, brilliantly cute. It was very, very well done.
The only Super Bowl ad to get a 5-star.
It's rare, actually. Yeah.
Nice.
Every year there's one or two. Well, here's an interesting thing we should all celebrate, by the way, as UK advertisers. The average Super Bowl ad is, and that we test about 80, and at Christmas there's about 80 UK ads. So if you say Christmas is our Super Bowl, right? Same sample size. Average star rating is 2.7 for Super Bowl. Average star rating is 4.3 for Christmas in the UK. So the standard is demonstrably different.
However, to turn your own point against you,
go on.
I mean, Christmas advertising, if you think of it as a category
benefits
is going to be, you know, Christmas is an emotional time,
quite right.
And then the products are going to be, you know,
you're right.
indulgent food and stuff like that.
I mean, we used to say Christmas is half a star. Probably now it's a star. Roughly speaking. Very good point. No, category contest is enormous. Now, I asked our friend Ritson to pop some questions over for both of you, so we'll give these a go. He's obviously in his Excel spreadsheet actually as well, because we got some quite good, quite techie ones here. Anyway, he wrote a column recently on the power of synthetic data. Very interesting, actually. So I don't know if you caught this story, but he created this perceptual map of car brands and then revealed that he'd done it on ChatGPT. And then he went and tested it with a real human survey responses, and there was a 90% overlap between what the computer was able to generate scanning the internet versus what people actually felt about these car brands. Now, 90% feels like within the realms of statistical significance, and you know, pretty. I mean, most people would take 90% as a. If I can get 90% of it right and save time and money, I will.
Yeah.
I guess the question for you two is, like, that being the case, what else can you do with AI to get shortcuts?
Lots to say about that. I mean, it was a great article. I was on holiday when it came out, and I was quoting. We were waiting for a bus in Mallorca, and I was quoting bits of it to my family, and my wife was going, "Shut up!
You're on holiday."
Yeah,
Les.
you're on holiday.
Les doesn't take holidays. It's clearly the case.
And it was classic Ritson.
Poor wife.
Classic Ritson, because it was, on the one hand, there was some very powerful and interesting ideas in it. Plus, also the best description of programmatic advertising that I've ever read, which was describing it as a black box full of turds and spiders. That was brilliant. But yeah, I mean, I think I've been messing around with ChatGPT, you know, for a while myself, and it's powerful and interesting. And I think as an industry, we probably kind of got the wrong end of the stick, in that I think the really powerful uses for it at the moment are actually in the research area rather than the creative area. You know, creative that's generated by AI, I think once you've seen it a couple of times, you recognize it pretty much instantly. But it's a great way of speeding up research. So I'm slightly biased because I know the people behind the synthetic data stuff. They are great guys, and they're doing interesting things. But I think the other thing that you learn from messing around with AI is you have to be really cautious with it, because it sometimes just completely fucks up, and it will tell lies and it will make things up. I mean, somebody once said it's like having a really clever intern who's completely unscrupulous, you know, who will go off, you know, just go and bring me data on that, and you don't know whether they've made it up or not. So you do really need to double check everything. But the speed with which it can come up with stuff that, I mean, you know, quick way of testing hypotheses, putting out feelers for things.
What areas do you think it'll touch? I mean, can it help with my media mix, for example, or which audience I should target? Those kind of questions.
I don't know. I mean, I think we should all be playing with it and finding out. But the point is that I don't think you can use it well unless you already know quite a lot of stuff, because you don't know whether or not to trust what it's telling you.
I think it can go badly wrong, as you say. I've had a bit of experience of it when it's already in pre-testing. We working with one client who used sort of AI pre-test to save time and money, and you can get really bum steers from it. I mean, one where it wasn't understood that there was a celebrity in this ad, because that couldn't be kind of detected by the methodology, and completely changed the response to the whole ad if you didn't know that was this certain person. So proceed with care.
Yeah.
Well, I can give you the data on that actually. So we've been using AI to compete with ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Can AI outpredict
Yes.
the System 1 approach?
Yes.
The correlation between the System 1 prediction and market share change over 12 months is 0.66. That's been tested 264 times in different studies because we continually update our validations. The correlation between AI trained on our data. So this is not this is AI with the biggest advantage you can imagine because it's using our own data, correlate whatever, 0.33. So it's not there yet. It's not there yet.
No.
But interesting on creative, another thing I'll chuck in as well. So we helped with a study looking at so we gave some art students a project with a fictitious brand to come up with some posters. And then we gave AI the same brief, almost identical. So one group, the students got 1.9 star, the AI got 1.83. There was one cell within this experiment where we had to ban the result, and they actually came out top. The reason we had to ban it was they used both.
Yeah.
So they tested with AI. They then used their judgment to improve it, and then they retested it with AI.
And that is the smart way forward.
And they got 2.8.
Yeah.
So I think that was actually the story.
It's another boathism, isn't it?
And this is exactly. Yeah. And this is exactly what I find with messing around with ChatGPT is that I think if you just used it and say, well, that's the answer, you get a lot. It can do some things quite well, but you get a lot of stuff that was not right or just very bland or very generic. But if it becomes a dialogue between a smart person like myself and this tool, then you can do something a lot better. And I mean the really clever thing about it is the speed, because that means that you can explore research avenues that you just wouldn't have the time to explore. A little example, trivial example. I'm reading Trollops, The Way We Live Now at the moment, and at one point in the book, one of the characters says something which about America being bigger than Britain, and I thought, oh, okay. So at what point did the US population pass the population of the UK? Was it around about this time, 1870s? That's quite a hard thing to answer with Google, and even with Google, you wouldn't bother. But I asked ChatGPT, and it came up with an answer, and immediately I thought there's something wrong about this answer. The figures didn't stack up. So had a conversation over the course of about a minute or two, and then eventually got ChatGPT to admit that it had, made a mistake. I misspoke about, and then eventually got to an answer that was satisfactory. But all of that stuff, kind of like, I would not have bothered to do that if I didn't have a thing on my phone that allowed me to do that.
Is that in the bus queue as well,
Jackie? No, that was lying in bed reading my book. Yeah, I'm sorry, I am a nerd, aren't I?
Well,
but you have to watch it.
You do. Well, I've actually done an experiment to prove this. A rather funny one. So I had this very negative review about the podcast earlier in the year, right? So this guy filmed a 7-minute video doing a takedown of the episode I did with Bob Hoffman. Yeah. And basically going, he's not uncensored. In fact, he called me tyrannically English bullshit. Tyrannically polite English bullshit. Anyway, that was how he kind of summarized the review. And it was properly, in a way, it was quite funny actually. So I when you get this situation, you think, well, what do I do? Do I get offended? Do I just treat it as banter? And I decided to treat it as banter and just enter into the spirit of this guy, and he'd copy me into everything and all that kind of thing. Anyway, I messaged him on LinkedIn and said, look, with respect, there are plenty of podcasts out there to pick on, and this is the first time he'd done a review. Like, why mine? And he said, well, I asked ChatGPT for the world's #1 marketing podcast. And you came up, right? And I said, that's interesting because I'm not technically the world's #1 marketing podcast, but as a joke, when I launched the podcast.
You said it, didn't you?
You said the world's number.
There you go.
Yeah.
You see. So, ChatGPT is learning. The only problem is when I tried to recreate the result, it obviously learnt itself in the time between then and now, and I couldn't recreate the result and got a load of other things.
Really
so, I don't even know if you know this, but at DDB, we're working on an AI, a lesbot.
Lesbot,
which is so it's which is trained on all the stuff that, Peter and I
what you would say.
and so on, and How Not to Plan's in there as well.
But does this mean we're going to go to conferences and Lesbot will be taking your slot then?
So I was messing about with it, and I said, okay, I was just asking it some questions. One of the questions I asked was, do ads wear out? And it gave me a long considered answer about the evidence that ads wear out. They do, yeah, blah, 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 blah. And I said, didn't we write in our book, How Not to Plan, that ads don't generally wear out? And it sort of went, sorry, I misspoke, yes, ads don't generally wear out. Yeah.
You're having to train your own bots. This is
an example. So it is already trained on stuff we've written, but all the same, it needed some, to be kept on the leash, as it were.
I see.
My view is that AI will help low-skilled people to become much more skilled and high-skilled people to become much more skilled. The people in the middle, I think, will be the ones who are in some danger.
All right. So Mr. Ritson had another question for you, Les. ESOV, right? Given that, some data out there is walled and it's difficult to get to, how reliable is ESOV now? Or how easy is it to get to a proper ESOV calculation?
Well, it's a valid concern, and certainly Peter and I have been expecting that share of voice would stop working. It would stop predicting market share. For years, we thought this, as the proportion of ad spend that is audited goes down, you'd think that this stuff would no longer work, but it still does work. So I'm literally, you were asking me earlier on what you're going to do when after this. I've got two things to do this afternoon, and the third one is finishing off a share of voice model, and it still predicts market share right now. Why does it do that? I think the answer is two things. The cynical answer would be that some of the unaudited media that people spend a lot of money on don't have much influence on long-term market share because they're short-term tactical stuff. The other one is that the unaudited share of voice tends to be proportional to the audited share of voice. So you're only measuring the tip of the iceberg. But, if you've got 20% of the audited ad spend, the chances are you'll probably have about 20% of the unaudited ad spend because people have similar ratios of.
If the ratio is the same, then it would hold, wouldn't it? Yeah.
So I think somewhere between, that's a kind of like one's an indicator of the other, to the other stuff doesn't work.
Yeah, it makes sense. That follows. His third question for you was, if I ran 3 MMM models, would I get 3 different answers?
That's a very interesting question. It would be an interesting experiment to do. There was a famous experiment done in the late 80s, early 90s, the ARF copy validation project. You know that one? So they did that with pre-testing. So they got 23 different pre-testing companies to all test the same ads to see.
Wow. Yeah.
Where they, you're getting nervous now.
Yeah, I was going to say, and the result. We didn't take part in this.
No, well,
just before they left out the correct answer.
Well, it's relevant to you because what they did was they compared. They didn't just compare whether or not they came out with different answers, but they compared the results against econometric measurements of effectiveness, and the overall conclusion was that pre-testing as a whole was no better than tossing a coin at predicting effectiveness. But if you looked within that, some methodologies were better than others, and all the ones that had any predictive power were based on liking of the ads. Anyway, that wasn't the question. But I reckon if you got different econometricians to all tackle the same problem, they might come up with different answers for 2 reasons. One is they might choose different data sets. One econometrician might think to include rainfall in the variables you test, and one might not. And the second thing is, the actual methodology of how you build a model has more craft in it than a non-expert might understand. One would hope to get around this, what companies should be doing a lot more of is actually forecasting, and using forecasts to test models that way. You know, if a model's good, it should have predictive power.
Well, I mean, going back to the ESOV thing, that's actually probably the reason I joined System 1 is that they were able to evidence in every single case that applying a creative weight on top of ESOV was more predictive in every case that we've ever looked at. So it has it tells you what you knew to begin with, that the creative matters, but still good to have the evidence. But the important thing from our point of view is that the prediction did improve the correlation to in-market performance.
And the other point is, and I've sort of made the same point myself several times, is that creative is really, really important, but also media is really, really important. And the, you know, basically weight of spend and share of voice is really, really important. And, you know, there's no point in having a great ad that no one sees. You know, your quote about building cathedrals in the desert.
Yeah. And brand size is very, very important.
Brand size is very important as well. So you've got to, you know, and really great advertising, you know, is popular advertising. It's ads that most of the time, it's ads that have, you know, that people like, makes them feel something, makes them, you know, emotions, feelings, associations, all that stuff at scale. And that's what we get wrong a lot of the times. We think it's all about just winning a little creative award for something that nobody sees.
Well, listen, it brings me up quite nicely, actually. I wanted to round off, right, with the best performing Adam and Eve ad on our database, because it joins our conversation up in a really beautiful way. Today, as we're recording this, is the first day of COP. We talked about purpose, and we talked about advertising. And the most successful Adam and Eve ad of this year on our database is Great Western Railways.
Yay!
Which I don't know if you knew that, because it's a lovely example, and also a reason to mention it as well. We've just included it in our green print report, which we launched at System 1, about how advertisers can help deliver sustainable messages in the right way. And what I love about this ad is it's funny, it's an Enid Blyton story, Famous Five. You know, it does all the things that great advertising does. It's a campaign.
Yeah.
It's basically a fantastic ad that delivers a message about taking the train rather than taking a car. And we talked about how to do purpose. Well, doing purpose with humour and storytelling and making a great ad is what we should be doing, right?
Well, you might be seeing a lot more of getting people to do the right thing for the wrong reasons almost, which is sort of where purpose, I think, went wrong a lot as well. It was sort of preaching at people. But this is a really good example of that, isn't it? It kind of slides under the door, that kind of environmental message, and people just see a lovely story and something that reminds them of their own holidays, and it's all very nostalgic. So very great. It's great to hear. I didn't know that.
There's no carbon messaging.
No.
You know, there's no kind of
hit you over the head with
real
anything.
messaging
No,
at all,
exactly.
apart from a big advert for you know, and we can relate to the insight of like getting stuck in traffic and being late and diversions, and then people on the train have a beautiful time and get there early.
And to the extent that it does the sustainability carbon stuff, it doesn't do it explicitly, but there's, you know, quite a lot of clouds of choking smoke in there, isn't there?
It's implicit, isn't it?
It's implicit. Yeah, very nicely done. Doesn't preach, as you say.
Yeah, no, so brilliant. So it's lovely to show that we can make a difference and to do some purpose in a funny way.
Exactly,
and
should
again,
more of that.
You know, the purpose is baked into the product, isn't it? You know, inherently, you know.
Back to your point before, 100%. So as you look ahead to this year, because we're now in 2024, I should say, 2024, as this goes out.
Oh, I'm still in 2014, don't worry.
Exactly, yeah, I know. But we should go, there's a lot to be said for that. What do you think we're going to be talking about this time next year? I mean, there's a big case for AI. We talked about how that could change how we do research. There's a case for, is this the year that sustainability finally actually we do something about? I don't know, it feels like we've been talking about it for a while.
Yeah, I think that's right. And probably more focus on doing that through products, packaging, pricing even, more than promotion, which is where it's been sort of focused arguably too much and in the wrong way up to now. So I think a lot more marketing on those sorts of basics rather than some of the things that have been diverting people's attentions over the last year. So a lot of climbing back down the benefit ladder into products and pricing and new products and that kind of stuff.
There's a good point, because I mean, if this year or last year was the year of consistency, maybe this is the year we get the basics right and get, because there's been a lot of distraction in the last few years with the global events.
Yeah.
Be nice to think we get some, get on and deliver the return for marketing.
It'll be the year where we don't talk about what's new at the end of the year. It'll be much more about just getting the basics right. And,
I don't know about what we'll be talking about, but the advertising industry, I'm sure, will be going up its own arse about something irrelevant.
That's one thing
that's
that
what they always do.
One consistent thing about the marketing industry.
As an industry, we love something shiny and new. I mean, we were all talking about blockchain, weren't we?
Yep.
NFTs.
Yep. How much of that is, apart from, actually, have you seen the McDonald's Crypto Bros ad? It's a poster. It says something like, Crypto Bros, we're hiring. Because they're all going out of business or going to jail.
That's very good.
I haven't seen that.
But yeah, I mean, we forget this, I think, is how often that as an industry we become obsessed with things which turn out to be, absolutely ephemeral. Like, do you remember, you probably went the point back in the late 90s when we thought that WAP was going to be the big technology. It was going to change everything, Does anyone remember what WAP is anymore?
No.
I mean, it does still exist, but...
Well, it brings us, I think, full circle back to, Sarah, your point at the beginning, which is you're not the customer. So if there's one thing we do this year, it's getting in touch with what our customers actually want to do rather than what we want to wang on about all year.
Yeah. Less wanging.
More.
And with that, thank you, Les and
on
Pete.
that bombshell. Oh, hang on, you said Les and Peter. Brilliant. Sarah, Les, thank you very much. It's been a blast.
Thank you, Orlando.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening and watching The Uncensored CMO. Hope you loved my conversation with Les Binet and Sarah Carter. I certainly had loads of fun doing it. If you'd like to never miss an episode again, please do hit the subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're watching this on YouTube, hit subscribe there too. If you want to get in contact with me, I am over at X, or formerly known as Twitter, at Uncensored CMO. And you can find me on LinkedIn under my own name, John Evans. Thanks for listening and watching. I'll see you next time.